most satisfying scene in this entire show so far. Man, I felt such relief when Letty went and fucked up those cars. You have no idea. Hey guys, before we go too deep into this video, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up. And if you guys want a more in-depth breakdown, definitely check out my podcast, the Magical Negro Podcast. I'm gonna link it in the description below. But before we get into this video, I wanna ask you guys, who is the main character in this show? Is it Letty or is it Atticus? Because I thought it was Atticus, but Letty has gone through so much shit this season, like from the first episode of running from the Shoggoths, the second episode dying, and the third episode having her house haunted, getting harassed by racist whites, getting beat up by the cops. Can my sis just live, please? That's all I'm asking. Can Letty live? But before we get into the ending of the episode and how they exorcise the ghost and the tragedies of the house, let's go back to the beginning. And this episode starts off, we have Letty in church. At that point, she's mulling over words, I'm assuming that come from her mother, in which they tell her she's never gonna accomplish it, when she's gonna buckle down. And then the episode is sort of her just coming to grips with the purpose of her life. Because remember, last episode, Letty died. For all intents and purposes, they shot her, she died, and now she's back. And now she's dealing with the fact that, yo, I could have died without accomplishing anything. But then she ends up buying a house. And the way that she explained it initially to her sister and to Tick is that the fact that she won the numbers. Now, for those of you who don't know what winning at the numbers means, it means that you won the lotto, but it's not the regular lotto. Because in the black community, for example, we have our own set of lotto numbers and our own set of like lottery, if you will. Everything is the same way as the lotto, but it's more of an urban thing where black people, it's kind of like pulling your money together as a community. And it doesn't span just like in communities, it's global. Because I'm Haitian, which cool shout out to the Haitians this episode because we are actually in here to win it. But regardless, I'm Haitian. We have our own set of numbers that we call bullet as well. When we put money into a pot, numbers are drawn and the winner takes it all. It's like winning the lotto. So she wins the lotto, buys this house, and she has this dream of turning the house into a sanctuary for black people on the north side of Chicago. At that time, and even to this day, like certain neighborhoods are more predominantly white, so it's not really integrated. And this is Chicago in 1955, but she buys a house in a white neighborhood. And off rip, her being there, her neighbors like, what? Her sister's even worried because you're buying a house in a white neighborhood. Your neighbor's already given us the stank eye and we didn't even move in yet. But Letty sells the sister on the dream of moving in, and her sister moves in with her, which is an interesting dynamic because Letty and her sister really aren't that close. They have the same mother, different dads, that's why the complexion is different, and they're not that close. Letty doesn't even have her mom's last name, and they're not really close. So that's an interesting dynamic, and she's trying to give back to the community. She's trying to give her life meaning because, again, last episode, she died. Then we move to Atticus and Hippolyta. Hippolyta, who is George's wife, is dealing with the aftermath of George's death, and she's grieving in her own way. She's not breaking down because as a black woman, she has to be strong. So she can't let people know that she lost the love of her life. Like, even if George was in love with Atticus's mom, the fact that Hippolyta loved George and she lost her husband on this trip, that bothered her. And we see her ripping through George's favorite book, just angry at the fact that she lost her husband, angry at the fact that the story that they told her was a sheriff killed him. So like a white sheriff killed her husband, and all she's left with is his favorite book, and that's bothering her because she wanted to go on the trip in the first episode, so she wasn't even able to be with her husband in the last days, and they don't really even have like any closure, if you will, because she had that conversation with him, and next thing you know, he's dead. So she's angry, and as she's moving through life, she has to put on the strong demeanor of a strong black woman, and Tick is trying his best to help out around the house, but that's also upsetting Hippolyta, not because she's not appreciative of what Tick is doing, but because Tick is doing the things that George used to do, and that's kind of like, bruh, like this is a constant realization that my husband is gone. Like, I understand you're his nephew and you're trying, but like, you have his same habits, and like, I'm not over that just yet. And Tick feels this, and Tick feels that he's been there long enough because it's been 3 weeks. So he decides to go back home and tries to stay with his dad. And his dad is passed out drunk because we know Montrose was a drunk. He was abusive to Tick. And we finally find out, remember in the first episode when Jackie Robinson came, smashed Cthulhu and said, I got you, kid. That felt random as shit in the first episode. But that is a story that Montrose passed on to Tick. The story is George and Montrose, when they were kids, were getting bullied, and someone with a baseball bat came in a Jackie Robinson uniform and beat up the bullies with a bat and said, I got you, kid. And that was like, so even though Montrose treats Atticus like a piece of shit. Atticus loves his father, which is why he trekked across the country to save his dad. And he even uses his dad's own heroic stories and his own life. And that's why he dreamt about Jackie Robinson saving him from Cthulhu. Within the initial day of Letty buying the house, Atticus came over to see her, and the white neighbors showed up and they started honking their horns and they tied bricks to the horn of their car to have consistent noise. We saw it in the first episode when they were going across the country. Atticus stands up to racist white people. It's in his character. He's one of those guys who just won't let that shit ride. So he decides he's gonna stay with Letty. And then after a few days of being in the house, day 5, we see a ghost. There's spirits in this house. This house is haunted. So on top of dealing with racist neighbors, Letty's house is haunted. And she sees ghosts and she's having Atticus help her look for this, what's happening, because she believed there were ghosts in this house. So as they're going through, we realize that she can't really open the window because the honking is still happening and the racist white people are messing with her furnace and making the house hot. And Atticus brought up a good point. Excessive noise and heat are a torture tactic that they used in Korea. So they're using warfare tactics to persecute the black people in this house. And it's like, bruh, you guys are using acts of war against citizens because of the color of their skin. Do you know how fucked that is? Like this whole episode, Letty's being haunted throughout the house, and that's not the looming danger. The looming danger are her neighbors who put a picket sign saying this is a white-only neighborhood. And I'm like, bruh, this is ridiculous. Full on ridiculous. That doesn't dissuade Letty from moving. Day 8 comes around and she has a housewarming party. Everyone comes through. They're dancing. They're celebrating. So Letty's enjoying herself and having this housewarming party. And I know the neighbors are seething because all these black people in their neighborhood jamming it up, having a good old time, partying, dancing it up. And on the flip side of them dancing it up, Dee and the other kids are downstairs playing with a Ouija board. And as they're playing with the Ouija board, having some fun, remember the house is haunted, so there is mysterious spirits in there. So then one of the spirits in the Ouija board writes, George is not dead. And I'm like, oh, George is not dead. Remember, the spirits at this point, we think as the audience they're the evil spirits, but the black people are actually here. The spirits are actually there to warn them, and George isn't dead. Of course, Dee gets upset because Dee thinks they're playing games with her father's name, but George is not dead. And I'm like, George is not dead. So his spirit has not crossed over just yet. Because you guys remember back to last episode, when they were leaving, they were talking about the book of Adam, and Montrose brought up a different book, the book of the dead. And George's like, no fool, we're not talking about that book of names. That's a necromancy book. We're talking about the book of actual eternal life as opposed to the book of dead. So if they can get their hands on the book of the dead, George can be back. Because remember, the Braithwaites brought Letty back. So with that magic, they can also bring George back from wherever he is, which is limbo, perdition, and not necessarily crossing over. So as the episode's going on, the party's happening, and Tick doesn't know how to approach Letty. So Letty decides to take matters into her own hands, starts dancing with somebody, and mind you, it's sexy dancing. She's sweating, and she's pretty much showing Tick what he's missing out on, and Tick is bothered, and people are thinking already that those two are in a relationship, but Tick hasn't made the move yet, and Letty's just showing out, teasing him, and at that point, Tick can't take it anymore. Letty goes to the bathroom, he follows her in there, even though there's a ghost watching them, which is weird as shit because there's a ghost watching them, but Tick goes in there, and then it gets hot and steamy, and they go at it, and I'm like, finally, this is happening, because they both want each other. It's clear as day. Who didn't know Letty and Tick were going to end up together? Who didn't know? And it gets hot and heavy. And once they're done, and I'm like, finally, Letty's bleeding. And she's like, oh, my time of the month came early. And Tick's like, no problem. Because, you know, a real man is not bothered if that comes on while that thing is happening. It's part of nature, of course. Like, much respect to Tick, because on top of staying to protect her, he did not embarrass her when her time of the month came on. And we know a lot of fools who would actually go and embarrass him, like, ew, what is that? Like, but Tick was a real man about it. So Tick leaves and doesn't embarrass her, which is totally gentlemanlike of him. And when Letty goes back downstairs, there's a burning cross on her fucking lawn. So she loses her mind. And what I love about this scene is she's had enough of these racist ass neighbors harassing her. She takes a baseball bat and she leads the charge, starts smashing cars up in the most satisfying scene in this entire first season. And what I even loved about it is the fact when she goes out, the woman leads the charge, the men all grab their guns, cock up, and follow her out. And I'm like, bruh, That's how you support a black woman, and that's how you stand up to them. They stand their guns out, daring somebody to come, and Letty lets these cars have it. And I'm like, bruh, support unity. Letty's sister pulls out, she pops the trunk, they all toss the guns in the car, and she hauls ass. So they can't be charged for possession of weapons, even if the neighbors said they had weapons. You can't prove it. And this is retaliation for the burning cross and the cars that are constantly honking every night. They all get on their knees in unison, put their hands behind their head, and know they're getting arrested. And I'm like, this is some fucked up shit. You cops roll up, you see the burning cross, but fuck that. You're gonna arrest the black people. And I'm like, bruh, whatever. This is 1955, right? Fuck it, whatever. They take Letty into the back of the car, and the police abuse her without laying hands on it. And I'm sitting here, this is police brutality. Because when the police officer straps in, and the other guy starts shaking the car, and she's bouncing around there. So the cop is talking about the noise complaints that the neighbors filed against Letty. And Letty's like, what about the 23 complaints that I filed against the neighbors? Fuck that, right? And the cop's like, ain't no complaints from you. And I'm sitting here like, I'm seething. But the cops do let us know about the history of the Winthrop house and how there were people who went missing, and they ended up finding limbs of those people throughout the house. And we get to learn a little backstory about the house, because once Letty gets out and she goes and she finds out her house is haunted, she becomes obsessed with proving that. But before that happens, Letty and her sister get into altercation because Letty let it slip that she didn't really win at the numbers. Her mom left her an inheritance. And the sister's like, why would mom, and they get in disagreement because Letty lied about it, and she's getting tired of Letty lying. While Letty had a good reason for lying, you can't really just lie about shit like that, especially since Letty didn't have a good relationship with her mom. So why would her mom leave her the money and her not tell the sister? Because the sister has been looking out for Letty throughout Letty's entire life. So Letty could have kicked her back some money instead of just letting her stay rent free. So I understand the sister's frustration, but at this time, Letty has more pressing issues. Her house is haunted, so she needs to find out why. Especially after the ghosts themselves were leaving her messages and pictures, and then the pictures combined summon the ghost of Winthrop, who tells Letty to get out of his house. So Letty's house is legit haunted, and at this point she doesn't know the real cause of the haunting, so she's trying to find out, and she's putting the pieces together. And we learn a little history about the house. The house used to belong to someone named Epstein, who did illegal experiments on black people. Like, we're talking about alchemic, fucking sick and depraved things, like beheading a baby, sewing the baby's body into humans. Like, it is fucked up shit. Like picking up poor black people, taking them to your house and mutilating them for your sick fantasies. And this is, again, a throwback look at how throughout history, black people has always been the subject of racist experiments. Because again, they're always the guinea pig. The Tuskegee experiments are one example of using black people as a way to test your things. If you have an experimental thing you want to try back in the day, you tried it on black people to see if it works. Mutilating them, attaching body parts. Like, all of this is fucked up shit. And it's like, why am I not surprised? Why am I not surprised? So as Letty's uncovering this and she's letting Tick know the house is haunted, I love the fact that Tick shows her the utmost support. And he's like, okay, so how do we get this house done? So as they're bonding, Letty let it be known that that was her first time ever, with Tick. And Tick is like, your first time? So Letty was a virgin up until this point. And I'm shocked. I'm sure you guys were shocked. We're all shocked because Letty presents so confident and she owns her sexuality, but she was a virgin. And that I love that the show does this, and it subverts a lot of the tropes that we thought. Because Letty is beautiful, and because she's light-skinned, and because there was a guy in the party who's been talking shit about him and Letty used to wrestle back in the day, we assume that Letty, who's used her sexuality to flirt, like we saw with Atticus at the party, and she attracts men towards her, we assume that Letty has had sex before. But that's not the case. Like, you don't have to have sex to use your sexuality and your sensuality and your femininity. And I love that fact. I love that Letty was a virgin, but she was able to use all of that. And we never were none the wiser, because we don't equate sensuality and womanhood to sex. We should not do that. Even though as a society we do, we shouldn't do that. And I love the fact that, no, we thought Letty was about that life, but she's not. But that doesn't mean she's not woman and she's not sensual. She's not aware of her femininity, which I love. Magnifique. So Tick and Letty decide to get a Haitian Mambo. A Mambo is a voodoo priestess. And the reason why she's Haitian, and it's very significant to this episode, because they're in Chicago. Chicago was founded by a Haitian man, Du Sable, back in the 1800s. So of course there's a strong Haitian presence in Chicago. And the fact that they brought a Haitian priestess, me being Haitian, I loved it. The representation that the show had. Like, I already love this show. Like, because I already love this show. They didn't have to do this for me, but they did. And I appreciate it. They show up with the goat, they slice the goat's head off, and the neighbors are watching this happen. And in Haitian culture, for those of you who don't know, the goat sacrifice is a more poignant sacrifice. There's two main sacrifices that we do. It's either a goat or a pig, right? And in this sense, when it comes to dealing with spirits, we sacrifice the goat to appease the spirit. When it comes to celebration of said fact, we sacrifice the pig afterwards to celebrate whatever it is we're celebrating in a form to give thanks to them. But when we need a favor from the spirits, we sacrifice the goat. So goat is the sacrifice for the favor. Pig sacrifices for the thank you of the favor. And I'm about to get a little heady on this because remember, Africans, Haitians, Latin America, and the Caribbean all come from the same spot. So we all come from Western Africa for the most part. So the Haitian voodoo lady said, we're going to invoke the Oya. The Oya is the original name of the spirit coming from the Yoruba Western African mythos, and also for the Santeria, which is the Latin American equivalent to Haitian voodoo and Yoruba mythology. It's called Alancia with the little squirrely thing on the S. And in Haitian Creole, we call her Mama Brigitte, which is all the same beings. So, because remember, just because the boat stopped at different places to let out Africans, and we all developed our own cultures, we all originate from Africa. So Santeria, Yoruba, Haitian voodoo are all in the same sense, the same thing, different names. Same rituals, same spirit, same way we invocate those powers to help us, and the same purpose, which was really dope to see in this episode because that is something that doesn't get translated a lot, and I love that fact. And because of all those differences, I know somebody could say, how do I know she's Haitian? She could be Yoruban, or she can also be Santerian in her practices. The chant that she was using is a Haitian chant. Mauvais l'esprit, chassez mauvais l'esprit, is we beseech and expel the mauvais esprit, which are bad spirits. Chasser means to chase or push away, and mauvais esprit means malevolent spirits or bad spirits in Creole. So she's chanting in Creole, therefore she is a voodoo priestess. And we see the neighbors come in with their baseball bats to fuck up Tick, Letty, and the Haitian priestess. But while this is happening, she's saying to chase out the evil spirits. And it's funny, the evil spirits themselves are the white people who stepped into the house, because we see the ghosts start killing them one by one. We see the baby in the man's body, and as she's saying chase out the devil and escape the bad spirits, we see that the white people themselves are the bad spirits that are harassing her, and they're dying. And I'm like, I see what they did there. Chassez mauvais l'esprit. The bad esprits are the white people that came in to fuck with them. So I'm like, yes, this works. And as this is happening, we see that the actual evil spirit was never the black people who were the tormented souls, but it was Hepstein and Winthrop who did that to them. So when he manifests and he possesses not only Tick, but the voodoo doctor, the spirits come, and together with Letty, they say, Satan, we're going to tear your kingdom down. And Satan is the white man in this sense. And they expel the spirit. And before they expel them, all the dysmorphications of the bodies are returned to normal, and they dispel the spirits. All the white people were killed that came to harass them, and pretty much the house is a-okay. And instead of the spirits being evil, the spirits of the house now, the black people can either pass over or guide over Letty. We'll see that next episode, but we see that the bodies were hidden under the house, and throughout history, the evil people who come to besiege this house are killed and put under another dimension, almost as though they're in hell. But Tick goes on to find out that the benefactor of the person who gave Letty the money was not Letty's mom. It was actually Christina. And Tick walks in there, closes the blinds, pulls out his gun, and tries to shoot Christina, but he can't, because all of the people, the sons of Adam, have their own unique spells, and hers seems to be able to lock people in places, which is the barrier, stopping Tick from moving. And she explains that Winthrop was part of the original sons of Adam. He worked with Titus, which is Tick's ancestor, and Winthrop wanted his own power, so he created his own faction. Remember last episode, they talked about there are different lodges throughout the country with different powers of Adam. And then she says something so poignant to Tick: you can't go around shooting white women. Be careful now. And that is a powerful message, because that is what happens throughout history. You can't go around shooting white people or white women at all, period. Point blank, period. No answers. And that is poignant then, that is poignant now. Anyway, guys, that is episode 3. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. And if you're new here, hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and check out the podcast for more in-depth breakdown of this episode. I'll link the podcast in the bottom description. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, and this video is about 10-15 minutes. The podcast is like an hour long. So if you guys want a more in-depth breakdown of Haitian voodoo, what the meaning of this episode was in greater detail, check the podcast out, please and thank you. All right, guys, until next time, binge on.